I'm Mary Elizabeth Williams, and this multi-hyphenate sitting next to me is Andrew McCarthy. He is an actor, a director, a best-selling author, an award-winning travel writer, all kinds of things. You probably know him best from his roles in iconic movies like Pretty in Pink, St. Elmo's Fire, Mannequin, Weekend at Bernie's 2.
We don't mention that one so much.
Oh, I have like 15 questions about Weekend at Bernie's too, because a lot of the logic in it doesn't hold up for me, Andrew.
Yeah,
but we'll get into that. You also know him from more recent work on television, including his recent recurring role on The Resident. He's a director. Now he is the author of a brand new book. I love this book so much. It's called Walking with Sam, A Father, a Son, 500 Miles Across Spain. Andrew, or as you are known to your son, Bro. Bro, welcome.
Bro. Thank you.
Let's get into this book and this walk that you took across Spain. This is the second time in your life you did this walk. Talk to me about the first time you did this 500-mile walk.
Yeah, back in the early 90s, I read a book by a fellow named Jack Hitt called Off the Road. And I'd never heard of the Camino de Santiago, which is an ancient pilgrimage route that's in the north of Spain for 500 miles. And back in the day, in the 8th century, they said that the bones of the Apostle St. James had been discovered in the farther and westernmost reach of Spain, and anybody who walked there would get half their time in purgatory knocked off. And which is a good deal, right? And but really, it was about real estate in the sense that Islam had taken over the Iberian Peninsula, and the Catholic Church wanted it back. So they said, as you're marching across Spain to get your almighty soul purged, kick out those damn Moors. So it led to the Crusades and all that stuff. So it's a religious route, or was, and still is, but I think it was largely came about because of real estate. But anyway, I walked it in the early 90s, and I found it a real life-changing experience. I guess in a word, it revealed how much fear that I carried in the world and walked through the world with. And that just was liberating to me in a way that I had no idea. I didn't even know fear was a part of my life until that moment of its first absence, you know. I had a sobbing fit in a field of wheat in the middle of Spain, and I just, had a temper tantrum, and which is sort of, I guess, as people say, a white light experience, really. And it was, I was revealed to myself in a way that was such a relief. I felt like me, in a way that I really hadn't before. So it was a profound experience. So that led for me continuing traveling and everything beyond that, and slowly evolved into being a travel writer and all that kind of stuff. So that moment, that instant walking the Camino really changed my life.
It was a pivotal moment in your career where you were feeling in the depths about maybe where you were going with your acting, and then this really...
Yeah, it was, it was after all the Brat Pack and all the success of being 22, 23, and I had abused a lot of alcohol for a number of years during that time, and so it was after that, and I was just kind of going, without even knowing I was looking for anything. I had no idea I was looking for anything. And when I picked up Jack Hitt's book, I read it on a plane, and I said, I'm doing that. And it's funny because back then there was no internet to look it up. I'd never heard of the Camino de Santiago, and I called up, in the back of the book it said he worked for Harper's Magazine, and so I called up Harper's and I said, can I talk to Jack Hitt? And they went, yeah, hold on. This was back when people used to go to the office and work, I guess. But anyway, and he got on the phone and I said, hey, Jack, you don't know me, but I read your book. And he was like, you read my book? I mean, he was thrilled. And anyway, he was very gracious, and I said, what do I do? How do I do it? And he told me, and off I went to Spain.
And you did this thing, and then it's a generation later, you have a 19-year-old son, and you start the book by thinking, I wish that I had known at 19, or I had had this kind of experience when I was younger, all of the insights. I want my son to maybe have a little bit of this as well, but not just to have it, you want to do it with him. You make this choice that I'm going to do this with my kid at this moment. What is it about this time in his life, he's 19, that you say, we got to grab this moment now?
Well, I left home at 17 and never looked back. And my relationship with my father basically ended at that moment. And I didn't want to have that happen with my kids. And I think I've harbored a not so unconscious fear that one day the day would come, he would leave, and that'd be the end of it, be over, and be gone. And that would just be recreated, that cycle, and I really didn't want that. And I had no template for how do you have a relationship with an adult child. You're used to the parent-child dynamic, but that no longer applied because he's either not listening to me or not interested in what I have to say, in disciplining him or that kind of thing. So I'm like, well, where do we go? What do we do? And so I thought, because that first walk of mine had been so transformative and so sort of embedded me in myself in a way that I had never been up to that moment, I thought if I could get him to go with me, we could at least see each other. Because I think that's one of the things we do with family members and with kids and parents and kids with their parents. We don't see them. We see our projection of them, and we project ourselves onto them, particularly when they're like us. Like my son is like me in some way, so I just project, he must be feeling all the things I feel. And he's not, news to me, newsflash. And so it was an opportunity to kind of see each other and as adults and kind of, always be his father, and I'm not interested in being his pal, but I wanted to know how do we relate going forward, and he was game to do that.
Which is extraordinary.
That was rare, yeah. Not many 19-year-old, I never would have done it with my father had he asked. And so that was an amazing gift he gave me by saying yes. He was also at a moment of sort of crisis in his life, which I've always said to many people that the Camino is, if you're in a moment of transition or crisis or something, or go walk the Camino. And people are like, I've had friends who lose jobs, and I say, go walk the Camino. And they're like, I need to get a job. I'm not going walking. And I'm like, no, you need to go walk. Anyway, my friends, the few that actually listen to me and do, all come back and go, that was the best thing I ever did. So anyway, he was at a moment in his life, and when he was vulnerable, and I said, so you want any desire to go walk Spain? And he, in his kind of despair, said, yeah, fine. And at that instant, literally, I went to the other room, I bought 2 plane tickets, and 2 days later we were in Spain. Because I knew, in a couple days he'd bounce back and would think better of this and not want to do this. So we were on the ground walking before he knew it hit him.
You got to get them while they're raw.
Yeah, you got to get them while they're raw.
It's kind of like when they're little and you just got to tire them out. It's the
yeah,
same. It's the exact same principle. And being able to relate to each other as adults. As I said to you before we started talking, there are so many books about how to take care of a baby, how to parent a baby, how to parent a toddler. There are so few guidelines for how to parent an adult, because you are still an adult, and especially when you have not had that template with your own parents, and you don't want to repeat the relationship that you had with your own parents. And this book is so interesting because it's really about that. It's about
that's what it's about.
How do I have an adult relationship with my adult child?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like you said, I had no idea what I'm doing. So I just came to the realization, I'll just share myself with him. Warts and vulnerabilities and frailties and all, and insecurities and all, and just let him see me. Which of course then, because when you're a parent of a smaller child, you're this figure in their lives, and they see this, they don't see you, they see this figure. And I don't know about other people, but I would encourage in a certain way that feeling of I'm the parent and this kind of thing, and it serves our ego and certain things. And, you got to let that go when they're adults, because they see through it, they're not interested in that, and I don't have anything to offer them in that way. But I can still, what I say now is I'm advocating for Sam now to Sam. He may not agree with what I'm advocating for him, but that's all I'm giving it to him. This is what I think, Sam. Do whatever the hell you want.
And it's interesting because, there's so much in this book about him on his social media and explaining to you what Raya is, or going on his Instagram, and all of the things that young people now that we did not grow up with have to document all of their heartbreak, all of their love, all of their attractions. We did not have that, but what you had was you were also a young person very much in the public eye. And Sam knows the young version of you in a way that a lot of people his age don't know their parents.
Yeah, he said, I wrote a book several years ago about my time in the Brat Pack, and he listened to the audiobook of it a couple times, and he said, wow, I had no idea. And he said to his sister, who's 16, she was asking me something, and he said, if you want to know who Dad was when he was young, you need to read his book. So it is sort of a weird and interesting thing. And they can look and see this young person that was me, their father, long before they were born, which I think is kind of weird. My daughter saw me, her friends told her she had to watch Pretty in Pink, and so she watched the trailer and saw me kissing Molly Ringwald, and she's like, I'm not watching a movie of you kissing some person. No, I'm not watching that. And I think, she's right.
She's got good boundaries.
Yeah.
I like that. And speaking of boundaries, I want to ask about this relationship that you had with Sam. The fact that he could be so generous in letting you depict him the way that he is in this vulnerable, messy moment in his life. Wet bathroom floors, I completely relate, with super wet towels everywhere. These moments of being so messy and young and vulnerable, he let you show him that. And he even does his own narration on the audio
Yeah, in
version.
the audiobook we did together, he read all his own sort of dialogue, yeah.
How did you work together with him in that kind of collaborative way? This is a creative collaboration you did with your son.
Well, the audiobook was sort of like the walk, fights, frustration, deep breaths, some laughs, and in the end, it seemed to work out,
But this is a big leap of faith for a 21-year-old to do.
Well, in fairness, he hasn't read it. I gave it to him. I said, Sam, you might want to read this before I turn it and see what, and he read a few. He's not a big reader, so he read some pages and then he's like, yeah, no, and hopefully someday he might, and we'll see if he's still talking to me then.
At least he knows his own parts.
But it's also, it's about him, but it's largely about me and my perspective and perception of parenting. It's about, he's a foil in a certain way to me and my own idiocy.
And you have a lot of meltdowns in this.
I do have a lot of meltdowns, I really do.
You talk about your knees, and I gotta say, I completely get that. It's because it's also about memory and how that, and revisiting our own past and revisiting our own selves, which is also what Brat is about. It's about looking at yourself and who you were and who you are now. And there's so much in this book that is about literally re-walking these exact steps and having this very, very different experience. And you saw that a lot changed.
And also, memory's so unreliable. We think we know exactly what happened, and it just is not accurate so many times in my experience. And I think I know exactly what a place was like, and it's just not like that. And there were places I went to that I knew I was before, and I had no recollection. It looked nothing like what I said. So it was a real shock to me to sort of walk in the footsteps of 25 years ago. And yes, more buildings get put up and stuff like that, but a lot of it what an unreliable narrator I am in my own life. That was interesting for me to discover.
As are we all, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And we tell ourselves things we have to get through the day and to justify behaviors and things. And so that was interesting to come to see.
I love the part in the book where you talk about how meeting up with someone who had gone the same trip at the same time and looking at photographs, and the photographs were even different.
Yeah, that was after the first trip. A friend I'd met on the trip had another friend in town who was on the trip, and we were walking the same day, the same trail, and it was like we were on different planets. The photos he took and the stories he told, I'm like, and we were there at the same time, and it was just, but that's all of us. We're all walking, whatever cheap metaphor you want to use is, we're all walking a different path, even though we're walking the same thing, Like Sam walked a very different Camino than I did, and that's as it should be in a certain way. But we also tend to project our experience. Other people must be feeling the same, and they're not. And that's a great thing to sort of realize, because there's great space in that. Because then there's space for him and space for me, and then we can sort of come together in the middle there when there's space. Because if you're just projecting onto it, it's so solidified in a certain way, and so to just back off a little bit, if that makes any sense.
It does, and especially I think when it comes to those family dynamics, because there's always going to be that part of you that sees that child as a child. Totally. And there's always going to be that child who sees you as the parent and not a flawed, imperfect adult who has maybe creaky knees or... Yeah,
my family, it's the same thing. My brother, when we were, this is a million years ago, called the fire department and called in a false alarm. And that's how we see him. Pete's the guy that called in the fire department. And to this day, he denies it. And his voice is on the recording. And he did it. And he denies it, 40, 50 years later. But that's how we see him. And we're not seeing him, really. We're seeing that, Anyway.
And we're seeing that memory, and we're seeing the way that memory has become mythologized.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting in this book because that's also the context for this entire path, for this route is myth, memory, what we build around it. What else was different about? You say yes, there were other buildings that had built up, but what does the pilgrimage look like now, especially post-COVID?
Well, literally, it's much more crowded than when I walked it, 27 years ago. So, and there's much more infrastructure to support people. They realize it's an industry now because it's gotten so much more popular than it was when I walked it years ago. So, but you still need to walk. You're still walking step after step for 500 miles. So it's, in essence, hasn't changed at all, and hasn't since the 8th century. You still have to walk the walk, you know? So yeah, things change and there are more and nicer places to sleep if you want and stuff, but you still got to get up and get there.
And some people take cabs.
There are always the guy who's going to take the cab and then hop out of the cab and act like he didn't.
But you're not that guy. I want to ask you about the walking because it is such a philosophical thing. It is such a meditative thing. And you wrote an op-ed for the New York Times about this recently, and this entire book is about the ways in which we connect with ourselves, our memories, our creativity, our paths, literally, through walking. And yet, we live in a country that actively discourages that builds cities that you can't even walk in. Andrew, for those of us who can't do 500 miles in Spain, how do you think we can connect with that?
Oh, I do think you're absolutely right that walking, I think we're created to think and move at a walking pace. I mean, when you walk, there's something about the rhythm of walking that releases the rhythm of thinking that, you know, it releases tension, it fuels creativity, like you said, and, you know, all the abundant documentation of famous writers saying, you know, really witty quotes and smart quotes about what walking does for them. You know, I think I think it's also an attitude of, like, instead of seeing walking as the slowest way to get somewhere, which is how I always viewed it, is to be sort of walking into yourself, you know, walking home to yourself. That's how I view walking now. So whenever I'm like, I'll walk. And like, luckily I have a dog, so I have to walk her every day, and I walk in Central Park. And, you know, I think a lot of it is attitude too, of just that, I'm walking into myself as opposed to, oh, I can't get a cab, so I gotta walk.
Right. And I love in the book too, you also talk about, like, do I put in my earbuds? Do I not put in my earbuds?
Well, you know,
like,
there's a thing with all the pilgrims of, like, you know, some are very precious about how, you know, and my life's not that precious. I just got to get there. And today, if I need a little Bob Marley, I'm going to plug it in and it'll help me get there.
Get a little bat out of hell.
Yeah. I mean, meatloaf always comes in handy, you know.
Whatever gets your feet moving. So I want to ask, ultimately now, it's about 2 years later, right? Mm-hmm. You said at the end of the book you would never do it again. Or at least that's how, you do. You do.
My son was ready to do it again. He was ready to do a whole nother one. Yeah.
He was like, I'm ready to go right now. I could turn around. Would you do it again?
Yeah, for sure. In
another moment of...
I'd kind of do it again, you know, today. But it's one of those things, it was such a big experience, like, that, and you have such mixed feelings when it's over. You're so relieved to be there and so kind of thrilled and proud, and like, there's a joy in it, but there's also such melancholy that, well, it's over. This moment in time, like particularly with my son, this is over and it will never come again. And I knew that the whole time. I had the great luxury that you have with adult children occasionally, which was time, which you never get with adults. And I had that with him. And maybe we'd walk it again, but it'll never be like it was. So there was a great melancholy, bittersweet feeling at the end of it. And so, and because it was such a big experience, I wouldn't want to walk it again too soon. You know, when I did it the first time, I had the same feeling. I go, I'll do that again within about 10 years. It took me 25, but, you know. So if I can still walk in another 10, you know. My son said when we finished it, he goes, we'll do it in 25 years, Dad. I'm like, we got to do it a little sooner than 25.
You're going to have to get really, really good shoes for it.
So, but yeah, I would go again. And if one of my other kids wanted to, which I'm sure they won't, my daughter was like, can we just go to Paris, Dad? You know.
And take Ubers everywhere?
Yeah. But look, it's a life changer. It really is.
Well, so I want to ask you creatively, you have been acting more in the past few years, you've been doing other kinds of projects. How has it changed you creatively? Do you see a connection between this and then the work that you've been doing just in the past couple of years?
Well, it's just brought me home. It just brings you home to yourself. And I also turned 60 this year, which is sort of like shocking to me. I never once blinked about age. 40, 50, never even thought about it. But 60 kind of struck me as like, wow, that's the beginning of being old, you know?
It's young. Well, you say in the book, you spent your whole career being young.
Well, and I was young, and I was famous for being young. I was famous when I was young, and then I was famous for having been young. And so to suddenly be sort of the beginning of being old and I somehow missed the middle, it felt like. And so, I forgot what I was talking about. See, it must be the dementia setting in already.
It's that 60-year-old brain.
Anyhow.
All right. So you didn't get to tell me about any things you're working on right now, or things that you've been working on in the past couple of years. But I want to take a little. Yeah. So tell me, what are you working on?
I'm just finishing a documentary about the past, again, about the Brat Pack. After that book I wrote, it occurred to me, like, I've never talked to any of the old gang about it. It was a very life-changing event for me, the Brat Pack. It changed who I would become and my place in the world. 35 years later, that's still how, when I'm introduced, that's going to be in the introduction, and who would have thunk that at the time? So I went back and dug up everybody, or as many as a bunch of the guys from back then, because I not been in touch with them. I hadn't seen Rob Lowe in 30 years, Emilio Estevez in 35 years, and Demi Moore, whoever, or Ali Sheedy. I hadn't seen them in so long, so I went to each of them and said, "Hey, will you talk to me about this? Because this was we were members of a club that we didn't ask to join, that no one else was. We're the only ones that know what it was like. It was a life changer for me, and it's taken me decades to come to terms with it and see it as a beautiful thing. I'm the avatar of a certain generation's youth, as are the other actors, But initially, the Brat Pack was really an albatross for a lot of us career-wise, and we hated it. Who wants to be called a brat? Who wants to be stuck in a pack? So when we found it really adversely affected our careers when we were young. So to have this thing stay with you for so long, and it ultimately transforms into this beautiful kind of thing. People look at me, they come up to me and go, "Oh my God, the Brat Pack, those movies," and their eyes glaze over, and suddenly they're talking about themselves, really, their own youth, and I represent that to them. That moment in life when your life is a blank slate to be written upon, and you're just cusping into the world like my son was in this book, and it's a beautiful, attractive phase. It's a moment, and it doesn't last long, and to represent that for people I've come to realize that's a real gift. But like I say, that took me years to acknowledge and to understand. So anyway, I went back and chatted with everybody, and I was to find I had so much affection for everyone, when I didn't particularly at the time. We were young and competitive and scared and insecure, but to go back and see everybody and just have so much affection for, like, Rob. When I saw him, like, wow, he was the first one I ever was in a movie with at 19 years old in 1982, and to see him again, and we both did, and we all did when we saw each other. And I think everyone was wonderfully surprised by not only affection for each other, but for our own youth, and that was very, I dare not say healing, but it was a nice experience to have.
It's all about just going back on the same road again.
I know, yeah. What's it Joseph Conrad said about he spent his first half of his life at sea and the second half of his life writing about the first half of his life. I think I'm now. Because the Brat Pack is just the same.
and in those movies, you're the same young man you always were. All right, Andrew McCarthy, thank you, or Bro, thank you so much for talking to me. The book, once again, it's called Walking with Sam, A Father, a Son, 500 miles across Spain. Do another 500. Tell us all about it next time, okay?
Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew.